Good afternoon and welcome to this week's episode of The Cards Court, the #1 weekly Ball State basketball show in the world. I'm your host, Griffin Leonard. Joining me, as always, this week as my co-host is Mr. Sam Niger. Joining us later on the show will be our guest for the week, the voice of the Central Michigan women's basketball team and the Lansing Lugnuts, Mr. Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. With that, the court is now in session. Sam, thanks for joining me this week. How have you been?
I've been great, Griffin. We've had a little time off. I'm happy to be back here. Just great basketball weather right now. The fresh snow, man, fire me up for it. Come on.
Well, no midweek action this week. Let's quickly break down the schedule, and then we'll just chat and see how things go here. Looking at this last week's schedule, as I just mentioned, no midweek games, just the Saturday contest, men's basketball on the road at Miami. After a close first half, they fell short in that one, 80-59. They dropped with that one in Oxford. The women's basketball team, however, after going down big early, came back and rode the momentum to a 15-point victory at Athens against the Ohio Bobcats. Sam, let's start with the men's team. Yet another frustrating loss for these guys who currently find themselves on the outside looking in as far as the MAC tournament goes. 3-game losing streak, 4-8. What's going wrong?
I just don't think this team has found, we've talked about it really all season long. It's about finding that chemistry and the will to win. We see that very much on the women's side. I just don't think this team has gelled enough to that point yet, but they do have to recognize that they are on the outside looking in. Regardless of where they're going to finish in the standings, the ultimate goal at this point is getting to Cleveland. And if the season ended today, that wouldn't be the case. But I mean, you've got 3 guys that scored in double digits in Bailey, Jihad, and Anderson. And yet this team just seemed to give up in the second half, especially defensively, which is really uncharacteristic. I don't know if it's just because it was the Redbird rivalry and they got down big and started to get deflated, but the chemistry is not there, the juice is not there, and this team has got to play a full 2 halves. We have not seen this team finish down the stretch in close games or in blowouts really all season long, and that's been the big thorn in the side of this team, especially in the second half.
Yeah, and road games are always tough, especially when you have a day like against Miami where there's 7,700 people.
It was a great crowd. It was a great crowd.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you're right. Defensively, it's been an issue. You look at the stats, Miami shot 60% in half number 2. They dropped a 50 spot.
Yeah.
It's just tough to win ball games when your opponent's shooting at that clip. And some of that's just tip your hat to the offensive capabilities of that team, but part of it's definitely just lackadaisical on the defensive side, and that's something they got to address.
Yeah, sometimes teams have big days, like you said. I mean, 80 points is a big day, but when you're having 50 points dropped on you by a fellow mid-major program in your own conference in one half, that has got to be eye-opening for the Ball State defense. This is a team that has actually improved pretty tremendously from last year to this year on the defensive side of the ball, and Michael Lewis will tell you that he's proud of the way this team had played defense up until probably that second half. That was one of the worst defensive performances I've seen from the Cardinals since he took over. So definitely something that they're going to want to address, something that they have to address over these next couple of weeks.
Yeah, just 6 games left in the regular season. Time's ticking for the Cards if they want to book their spot in Cleveland. Still definitely attainable. They're only a game out, and we'll talk more about that later on the show. But time is ticking. On the women's side, pretty much the complete opposite. They just clinched their spot in the MAC tournament. Still tied for first in the conference with Toledo, and we'll talk about the huge Toledo game coming up on Saturday a little later. But talking against the win over Ohio, they went down huge in that game. I believe they were down at 18 at one point.
They were
in the contest, and then they fought it back to single digits right before halftime, and after Ohio scored 20 in both quarters, 1 and 2, Ball State held them to 20 in the entire second half alone.
Yeah, and 7 points in the fourth quarter for Ohio. The team just recognized that they had to get it done on defense. We just talked about it for the men. On the women's side, this is a team that knows how to close out games defensively, and when they're going to get in some of these much closer matchups down the stretch, whether that's in Cleveland in the MAC tournament or, dare I say it, in the NCAA tournament, this is a team that knows they have to be able to close out games defensively because good teams know how to go on runs late. And I'm talking about opponents here. So if they get matched up against a 5 or a 6 seed or a 4 seed, those teams, regardless of how close Ball State is playing them late in games, good teams know how to make those runs to put themselves out in front. So that is really a good sign for this Ball State team to know that they can play tough as nails defense down the stretch, and holding a team to 20 points in any half is something to be excited about.
Yeah, exactly. And part of it in that first quarter was just that they weren't hitting their shots. They shot 13% from the floor in quarter number one. But you had players like Annie Roush really stepping up off the bench. She played more minutes than Marie Kiefer and Alex Richard, who started over her. She's only started 2 games, but she has made a really strong impact off the bench. One stat I wanted to highlight: 10 for 15 from the free throw line. Um, we've seen her struggle at times,
Yeah.
but it was good to see she hit some big ones down the stretch. And the team overall, 30 for 38 from the free throw line. They were at the line a lot and made those count when it really counted.
It's one thing to win games, but it is another thing to see such encouraging stats like that. This team gets it done in the clutch in big moments at the free throw line and defensively. This is a team that looks like they are built for a championship right now, and that's why they clinched the spot over the weekend.
Well, we'll talk more about this team as the show goes on. For now, we're going to take a break. We'll say goodbye to Sam. Thanks for being here. We'll see you in a little bit, Sam.
Sounds good. Thank you, Griffin.
When we get back, I'm actually going to hop on Zoom with our guest of the week, Mr. Jesse Goldberg-Strassler, so don't go away. You're listening to the Cards Court here on the SportsLink Digital Radio Network, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie.
To catch the best stories in Ball State sports every month, tune into the award-winning show, SportsLink Stories, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie. Victory Honda of Muncie is proud to support the creative storytellers of Ball State SportsLink.
Welcome back to the Cards Court here on the SportsLink Digital Radio Network. I know you're not used to seeing us, but we're doing it over Zoom, so we figured might as well give you something to look at. But I'm here joined with Mr. Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. Thank you so much, Jesse, for coming on. Normally, we don't have people from the other team, but I figured that you're too good of a guest to not have on the show.
The respect is mutual. Thank you for having me. It's always a good day to talk action.
Yeah, right. Now, Ball State plays Central Michigan in women's basketball on Wednesday, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But first, I wanted to let the listeners get to know you a little bit. You've been the Central Michigan women's basketball voice for how many years now?
Since 2014, 2015. It had been Jared Sandler, who then moved down to Texas to join the Texas Rangers broadcast team. The fun thing about him was he was probably the best basketball playing broadcaster in the league and was a member of the scout team. But after he left, they combed through Michigan and they extended the invite. I've been there ever since.
Have you been playing much? Are you on the scout team now as well?
Only with my 4-year-old. I can't ball with no. When I was younger, I was pretty good at passing and fouling.
Okay. Hey, at least that's something, right?
Yes.
Now you don't do just basketball either, right? You're also the voice of the Lansing Lugnuts, minor league baseball team. How is that?
Calendar shapes up well.
What's that?
The calendar shapes up well. It's basketball November through March and baseball April through September.
Yeah. How is balancing that though? Because you're right, the calendar syncs, but switching over sports there's at least got to be a little bit of a buffer stage there, right?
I feel like one prepares me for the other. When I exit basketball and I go into baseball, it helps me keep my energy right. It makes sure that my voice has the proper stamina. And then when I'm going from baseball into basketball, that reminds me, hey, still tell stories, still find out fun things to share about the players or about the other team.
Now, when you talk about storytelling in baseball, I know you definitely have long ties to broadcasting baseball, but how have those experiences, storytelling and taking what you've learned calling that game, how does that translate over to calling basketball? It's a much faster sport, not as much dead air time as baseball, but still a lot of air to cover nonetheless.
You can get sly. You can describe as the point guard brings it up the court, where they're from. When they get fouled and they go to the free throw line, you can slide in that they're one of triplets, or you can talk about their major, anything that you are able to say in the moment. Let's say Sophia Wired has the ball in her hands, and I can mention she hit this buzzer beater against this team. It's so fun to be able to slip in those little facts just to enhance the game that we're calling. It's not just pass, 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 shoot. There's so much more that goes into it than that. And I think it's important for us to bring alive who the players are and what they're trying to do. Baseball, it's the same thing. So if I see a player come in off the bench, I want to know, are they coming in off the bench to be instant offense, to be defense, to help on the glass, maybe a variety of things, to be a primary ball handler, to give somebody a breather. Baseball, if there's a batter who steps up to home plate, it's my job to say to you, this batter's job is to get on base. This batter's job is to knock in runs. I feel like understanding a person's role within the team is important to understanding how that team wants to win.
Well, and I know word choice is especially important to you, and you actually have a book, don't you? The Baseball Thesaurus.
I wrote two books so far, Baseball Thesaurus and Football Thesaurus, about how to talk those sports. I'm working on my Basketball Thesaurus right now because when I first started broadcasting Griffin, I realized I didn't talk the sport well enough and I needed to study the language. I'd played, I watched, I listened, but you don't really talk it until you get around it, until you listen to the coaches and the scouts and the players and more. So it was so important to me to make that a study and to say, if I'm going to broadcast this game, I need to really study how it's talked. And that led to the books.
For sure. And for somebody who hasn't necessarily read the books, what would they expect when picking it up? What would even as a non-broadcaster, what would a non-broadcaster expect to gain from reading one of your novels?
There's the fun of the synonyms, which I think that, oh, it's great. Let's say in basketball, someone can bury a shot, stroke a shot, drill a shot. There are all sorts of different ways to describe it. But then I love asking the why. So, for example, in football, before a penalty flag was thrown, how did they declare a penalty? And the answer is the referee had an air horn that they blared out at the players. Why is the field called the gridiron in football? What is the origin of the pitcher's mound in baseball? So to understand why we're using these words, it's so good to understand why the words came to be in the first place. And then you really get that feeling of, oh, if I wanted to describe the nail on a basketball court, why, how is the right context? It all makes the sport come to life when you understand why and how the words are used.
When you look at a sport like football that so many people watch, but not everyone has that opportunity to truly understand it, how do you think that a well-versed broadcaster in the sport can really help the audience not just enjoy the game that they're watching, but really comprehend the action at a deeper level?
I think it is up to us to talk to everybody at every level. That is the person who knows nothing about it, and that is the person who already fashions themselves a genius. And I think we can do that. The metaphor that I love to use is in the United Nations. There's someone speaking up front, and us listening, might not speak the same language. So we're going to need a translator. The broadcaster is the translator. The broadcaster is the person who sees the action going on and translates it to the people listening. So sometimes that means us describing why a 2-1-2 defense is used. But sometimes that also means in saying, here is the kind of person that she is. So we make the play come to life and the strategy understandable in how, why, etc. And then we also say, and by the way, here are the people who are playing the game. So if you have no working knowledge of the game, I'm still engaging you by saying, here is who the human beings are. And if you do have a working knowledge of the game, oh, then you're right in to understand what kind of pace are they trying to play at and what is going wrong for them right now.
Yeah, you briefly mentioned there the humanization of the athletes. Why is that so important to you as a broadcaster? Because obviously, when somebody tunes into the game, they're there to listen to the game, not necessarily hear someone's life story. But why are those stories often so powerful?
I don't think that you need to give a life story to put in something that catches the ear. So if I simply say to you, Central Michigan has brought in the 6'5" freshman Desiree Kyles. The listener goes, okay, she's tall. And then I can insert, has a pet snake. And then we continue on with the action. And I don't even need to say anything more. You as the listener go, Did he just say that she has a pet snake? And that tantalizes. That's the sort of thing that's very fun. The Chippewas had a legendary player named Presley Hudson who had some great battles against Ball State. Well, Presley loved ice cream. And whenever Central Michigan could score above 100 points in a game, the whole team went out for ice cream because it was Presley's favorite. So you understood, I could tell that story at the start. I could say, Presley loves ice cream. Here's a quick story. And then that feeds into, oh, they're approaching 90. Is this going to be an ice cream game for the team? So you see, it is very much how can I draw you in and connect you a little bit more than you were connected before.
Yeah, I love it. I love like when I'm prepping for games, I love trying to find those little nuggets that you would know, especially about the other team, because like as fans, you really get to know your home team, but you have these teams coming in from different states, different aspects, and you never know what funny little things. Everybody has their own thing, right? Like you talked about the ice cream, and I know that's a thing Ball State's been doing for the last couple of years. When they win, they'll go out and get ice cream. I know hopefully they'll be looking to get some ice cream after the game Wednesday.
I think that's important for the fan base, for all of the loyal rooters that you can start to chant ice cream. You can start to ask, hey, what is her favorite flavor? Anything that brings the team to life, anything that I don't know, makes you feel more connected. Because I think it's our job as broadcasters to care for all of the people who care. They want to care. They do care. They just want us to care as much as them and then to surprise them. And that way they know if they're tuned into a Griffin Leonard broadcast, they'll be surprised by something that you share that they didn't know.
Yeah, well, hopefully we as the host can surprise some of these listeners with our great analysis of these two teams. We'll talk more after the break about Maction as a whole and this upcoming matchup for the Cardinals and what fans should expect the rest of the season. You're listening to the Cards Court here on the SL Digital Radio Network, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie.
Hi, I'm Chris Taylor, Senior Director of Digital Sports Production and Ball State SportsLink, the nation's first 4-year academic digital sports production program. It's the intersection of sports and storytelling, where we're training the next generation of digital content producers. It's truly unique because a lot of schools have sports broadcasting and sports journalism, and while we have elements of both of those, our focus is on sports media production and the behind-the-scenes work. And I think that's what separates us at Ball State, because a lot of schools will teach students to learn production or live event streaming, but we're teaching storytelling. And that is producing long-form, layered feature stories where we can humanize our student athletes and our coaches and tell the story as to why they're playing their sport at Ball State. Anyone can produce or edit things that are flashy and look good, but can you tell a story? And at Ball State, I think we really teach that, and the success is evident.
Welcome back to the Cards Court here on the SportsLink Digital Radio Network. Griffin Leonard here with our guest, Jesse Goldberg-Strassler. Before the break, we talked about you, and now let's talk about the reason why we're both in this industry to cover some college basketball. And Central Michigan's had a really surprising men's team. Ball State's definitely had a little bit of a downside as far as expectations coming in with year 2 of Michael Lewis. But what have you seen from both sides on the men's side as this season's progressed? Any surprises? Anything that you were like, yeah, I thought that was going to happen, you know?
I think that how the Chippewas have played has been a gigantic surprise. That I think that there were hopes that things would be better this year, but there were so many newcomers brought in by Tony Barbie. And he entered the year and he talked about how this was his deepest team, his best team of shooters that he has had in a while, but just trying to figure things out. They took their lumps during the non-conference schedule, and then you enter into the MAC, and you know Akron is great with the defense that they play. But then beating Toledo, they have had some statements. Wiping out Western Michigan to the extent that they did, I think that this Chippewas team might not have surprised themselves, the players and the coaches, but I think that they have surprised the conference as a whole.
Yeah, I know back in January when we hosted the Chippewas in Muncie, Ball State came up short in that game. And I think that was in the moment, everyone was like, oh, this is a terrible loss. Can't believe the Cards didn't win this one at home. I think it was the first home loss of the season as well at the time. And now looking back on it, it's not that bad of a loss. Central Michigan's looked really good. In terms of as this season plays out, obviously eight spots in the MAC tournament, 9 teams that are probably somewhat deserving of it. There's going to be one team that's left out. Right now, Ball State is that team. Western Michigan is on a 6-game losing streak now, and they're right there too. How do you think it's going to shake out?
Western Michigan is such a miserable road team. They're 2-11 away from Kalamazoo. That is a gigantic Achilles heel for them. They are vulnerable. And I think for Ball State, the opportunity is there to leapfrog them.
Yeah, I know it's March 2nd, I believe is the date. A couple Saturdays from now, that's going to be the make or break game for the Cardinals. If they can get the job done at home against Western Michigan, then they should be just fine because they won in Kalamazoo. So they have that head to head if they can go 2-0. But you never really know how things are going to shake out in MAC play. Over on the women's side, we have this matchup coming up Wednesday. I know you called the game in Mount Pleasant a couple weeks ago. We were talking about it before we hopped on the show, but Central Michigan was in that game for the bulk of the first half. And you were telling me that's been the story of the season for Central Michigan. They play hard, but they've just had these lapses.
It's been a question of how much of the lapses are because of them and how much is because of the opposition. There's a big three in the MAC, right? It's Ball State and it's Toledo. And then we can add Kent State right in there with them. Against all three of those teams, the first half has been highly competitive. And then in the second half, things have gone completely sideways. In the initial meeting against the Cardinals, Allie Becky went off, but I would also argue that the Ball State defense clamped down in the second 20 minutes. So that's why I look at Central Michigan, a team that returns Tamara Ortiz, but lost Taylor Anderson for the year. That first half, they really have given it everything that they've had. But some coaches challenge their teams, can you play 40 minutes? Against Ball State, it's can you keep things competitive into the third quarter? That's what I'm going to be watching for is this game still going to be competitive in the third?
Yeah, there's a lot of question marks, I think, right now for Ball State's women's team, just because they've shown some signs of weakness. They going into MAC play, your only 2 losses were Notre Dame and UConn. And then to start MAC play, they were just lightning hot. Nobody, even Toledo really couldn't keep up midway through that game in Muncie. But they lost the game at NIU. They had a lapse where they almost blew the MAC SBC challenge game just because of turnovers. And then we had some similar struggles on Saturday against Ohio where they were down 18 points at one point in that game. So do you see Central Michigan as having a real opportunity to come into Muncie and shock a lot of people?
Yes, because the opportunity is always there. And then the ball is tipped and we see what happens. I think that a loss in DeKalb is something that happens to a lot of great teams over the years. It's tough to win at Northern Illinois, even though their court isn't now what it used to be. I like Central Michigan's talent. I especially like the Chippewas' young talent. I think that the freshmen of Tamara Ortiz and Desiree Kyles, one of whom is 5'4", and the latter is 6'5", I think that there's a lot of promise there. I think that this is a team with a brand new coaching staff, and Kristen Haney's got a great crew, that they have been taking steps in the right direction throughout this year, that they have been fighting. They do have height that it is difficult to match up with when things are going right. It's the 6'5" Kyle's off the bench, but 6'5" Rochelle Norris and 6'2" Nadia Jean. That's difficult to match up with. And it's been fun to watch the battles with Ball State jamming things in and making sure that there's a ton of traffic there. Because then the next step is, can the Chippewas hit outside shots? And that is going to be the dare that is placed before Tiana Timpey. Now, if Timpey can hit from the outside against the Cardinals, things change. But in the initial meeting, Timpey hit from the outside in the second quarter, and that was it. And there have been games this year where she has been invisible. There have been games this year where she has been sizzling. If Central Michigan can't hit its threes, it's going to be very difficult against Ball State.
Yeah, and then you talked about the three-headed monster of the MAC in Ball State, Toledo, and Kent State. Um, Traditionally, the MAC is a one-bid conference. There's been talk, at least here in Muncie, that depending on how things shake out, that the card should be considered for an at-large bid should they lose the MAC championship. But how do you see how do you predict and see that race shaking out in the end? And do you think the MAC is a two-bid league if the right team doesn't win the tournament?
You go back a couple of years when the MAC was a two-bid league with Buffalo and Central Michigan. I hated that conversation all throughout the year because I didn't want to think about losing. I wanted both teams to get to the championship, and it's good for the MAC to get the teams in. And then CMU and Buffalo went on a great run in the tournament, and it was tremendous. But it's such a tough question to ask because you don't want to think about a loss. You want to think about punching your own ticket. I do think, and just taking Kent State out of the equation from Toledo and Ball State, the loss of Corinne Hauser is gigantic. You take her away from Kent State, they're not the same team. And there's a lot that I like about them, but there is so much that is placed on Katie Shoemate's shoulders. Jenna Batch really needs to continue to step up each game. They've gotten good bench help. Abby Ogle is a top-notch defender, and on Corinne Hauser gave them a different dimension that they cannot replace. So that, because of that, leads me right back to Toledo and Ball State. And I think that those are two fine teams in different ways. And that leads me back to that question of I hate talking about what would happen if a team loses. And then you start looking at the non-conference schedule. But I do think the fact that they are each other's only equals. I think that there's a very great argument to make, especially with Hauser's injury. And I really enjoy seeing two quality basketball teams face off. What I value about Toledo is just how old they are. That they've all been there for 5, 6 years. We know who they are. We know what they are. And so that's why I've had so much fun this year watching the Cardinals take this step forward. You beat Toledo once more. This would be a lot of fun. Because I think Toledo's name and what Trisha Cullip has done there, that's why I really enjoy, because I've gotten to see how great the Brady Sally teams have been for years and years. It's so good to say, respect us, respect what we're doing. And this all along has felt like a special year. So it's a non-answer for you. I would rather not say, okay, when this team loses, what do we do then? And do we value Toledo higher or Ball State higher? And let's look at the non-conference. I enjoy as a fan how titanic that collision is. I appreciate Kent State and how great this year is. And I'm sorry that Corinne went down. Injuries are the worst. And then let's just clash in Cleveland and see what happens. But with the two bid conference, you know as well as I do, how much of that is based upon how many other bids get spoiled by what goes on in the other tournaments around the country.
That's 100% correct, and I guess that's why I'm glad I'm not on the committee because I don't have to make those decisions. But I know just as you are, like I'm really excited for Cleveland and looking to see what really shakes out. I was there last year when Ball State came up short, and I know that there were a lot of feelings of that they could have and should have done better. And a lot of the same people are back looking for a crown. I'm really hoping that Central can sneak their way in. I think as we've talked about today, like they have potential and they have a lot of talent that definitely hasn't gotten to where they can be. And I hope that they can find their groove before the season's over. And then I'll see you in Cleveland.
I love how junior laden this Ball State team is with the experience level and yet the feeling of there is a next year, but don't think about that. Win this year, win next year. That's really fun for me to see that kind of stability and quality with the Cardinals program. So I'm looking forward to this upcoming game on Wednesday, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this Maction season.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you, Jesse. Always great to talk. I wish you were going to be in Muncie on Wednesday, but like I said, hopefully both teams will be playing in Cleveland, and I'll see you then. But that'll be all the time we have right now on the Cards Court. We're going to take a break. When we get back, Sam and I will talk more Ball State basketball, and we'll send you on your way. You're watching the Cards Court here on the SportsLink Digital Radio Network, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie.
Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership, and here's why. We stand behind every car we sell and are dedicated to helping our customers save time and money. All our pre-owned cars undergo a rigorous 182-point inspection and come with a 90-day warranty to ensure that you're getting a Victory quality vehicle. Plus, you'll get 2 years of complimentary oil changes and tire rotations. We're part of a top 15 dealership group and have an enormous selection of vehicles with access to inventory at over 45 locations. You always get more for your trade and the best possible rates with us. We have an excellent relationship with hundreds of lenders. Our exclusive Car Doc maintenance and membership program will help you save hundreds of dollars in the process of maintaining your vehicle. Lastly, our state-of-the-art body shop and certified technicians perform high-quality repairs and paint work on most vehicle makes and models. Victory Honda of Muncie. We're not just another car dealership.
Welcome back to the Cards Court here on the SportsLink Digital Radio Network, presented by Victory Honda of Muncie. Well, wouldn't you look at that? We're back in the studio, myself here with Mr. Sam Niger. Thanks again to Mr. Jesse Goldberg-Strassler for coming on the show and not just talking Central Michigan, but talking about the MAC as a whole. Really enjoyed that conversation. And now let's get into PBP's keys. 3 keys for both of these two teams to unlock if they want to find success in their upcoming week. And as the season dwindles, Sam, the games are growing ever so more important. Let's start with men's basketball. Time for fooling around is over. You got 6 games left. You're on the outside looking in. 2 very, very winnable games this week against Northern Illinois and Eastern Michigan. You got to get business done.
You certainly do, Griffin, and we've talked about it. This Ball State team is one with a confidence problem. Well, nothing's going to boost your confidence more than playing 2 teams that you've already beat this season. Now, don't get me wrong. DeKalb is a tough place to play. That's a tough travel day. We saw that on the women's side. That is one of the most difficult places to go play a game in the MAC. But home against Eastern Michigan, a red out, I expect that will be a decent crowd on a Saturday, a crowd that we're more accustomed to seeing on the men's side. So I think both of those are very winnable games. I mean, they took care of business against Eastern Michigan on the road, which is not something we've said of Ball State men's basketball this year, but I think that's going to be a big confidence booster for that as well. It's just going to come down to how much this team still wants it. They gave up in that second half against Miami. If they're able to ride the hot hands of Jihad and Anderson and maybe get a couple of freshmen involved, I'm looking at guys like Trent Middleton Jr. and Mason Jones. If they come out ready to play, come out as a team with the full package, having the mindset that there is no more screwing around, they're going to set themselves up for success, at least heading into this week.
Well, and we'll talk about it more in a minute, but those are 2 games where you feel like if they don't go 2-0, you have to pick up an upset win.
You do.
If you get these 2 in the win column, then you feel decent about your chances at Cleveland. Let's move over to women's. Big game Saturday. Toledo, we saw the hype, we saw the excitement when they were here in Muncie. The Cardinals fed off of it, and they did a lot better than I think a lot of people truly thought they were going to. But now you gotta enter Toledo, and you gotta go on the road into that dome where you know it's gonna be packed. Toledo has a history of having a really good women's basketball attendance. If I remember correctly, last year when Toledo played Bowling Green, they set a record.
They did,
because it was a rivalry game, and it was to determine who was going to win the MAC.
Yeah.
Now you have pretty much the same thing all over again. I expect 5,000 people in that arena, and you got to block out the noise if you're Ball State.
That's a reasonable guess. I mean, that's a program that the university just loves. The fan base loves Toledo women's basketball, and you said it. The atmosphere here in Worthen when Toledo came to town was some of the best I've ever seen at a Ball State women's basketball game. But they have to realize that Toledo is going to be bringing the noise. Now, this is a team that knows how to block out the noise. They have taken care of business in games that they are supposed to win every game this year except one, and that's that Northern Illinois loss. Now, I do have some slight concerns about this team on the road. We saw the one loss against Northern Illinois as well, and they got out to a really cold start against Ohio. Now, they were able to recover against the Bobcats. That's because I think Ball State is a significantly better team than Ohio. I wouldn't necessarily say Ball State is significantly better than Toledo the way they're better than Ohio. So Ball State has to play a full 4 quarters. You can't dig yourself a hole early. You're going to have some nerves in that arena, but if they're able to come out with a hot start, this is a team that knows how to take care of business, and I think just about everybody here in Muncie expects them to be able to do that even against a tough opponent.
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where there's definite weaknesses in the Ball State lineup currently just because of their current form.
Yep.
But if they can get the job done on the road, not only would they have that confidence, they'd establish themselves as the unanimous best team in the MAC and the clear favorite to win the MAC tournament in Cleveland. Then for the third, and you just mentioned it with the Ohio game, both teams, they got to establish themselves early. It's been a challenge to really get off on the right foot in the last few games. If you can establish yourself early, and this goes for both programs, you're going to put yourself in a better position to win.
Yeah, you definitely are. And I especially want to go back to the men's side here because they play the middle third of basketball games so well. They finish the first half really well, and typically they start the second half with the same pep in their step that they left the first half with. It's about starting and closing games for this men's team, and that's going to come with experience. That's going to come with time. Well, you've had an entire season worth of time to build to a point where you can play a full 40 minutes of basketball. This team has got to get out to hot starts. They have to recognize how important these games are this week, and I think especially home against Eastern Michigan, they're going to know that they have to come out early. They're going to feed off the crowd, and I think they're going to have a hot start. And then you go over to the women's side, and it is business as usual. No, they have not started great on the road. We saw the struggles, again, against Northern Illinois and Ohio, but this team knows how to play to the level of their competition. If they're playing a really tough team, they're going to play their best basketball. They know they're going to get Toledo's best shot, and I think Ball State recognizes that they have to come out early and throw a couple of punches, metaphorically, to get the edge on Toledo, and this is a team that certainly has the ability to do that.
Well, that was PBP's Keys, and now let's turn the page over to a new segment. We figure it's the end of the season almost, at least it's getting close. Might as well take a quick look at the standings and see where the Cardinals sit. Let's start with the men's standings. Akron and Toledo lead the way, alongside Central Michigan, who surprised a lot of teams this season.
Yeah.
And then things get really interesting. Not a whole lot of disparity between seeds 4 and 7, 8, almost 9.
Yeah.
Ball State sitting there in the 9 spot. You can see them right outside of the edge. Those top 8. So Western Michigan, as of now, is the last team in. This is where it gets really interesting because Ball State is both a game out of 11th and a game out of the tournament.
Yeah.
So Ball State, really, if they can go on a run here, I'd say even a seed as high as the 6th seed is still possible. Now, what they will do, that's obviously hard to say, but as we mentioned, if they can win these 2 games this week, they'll be in a great spot where a win against Western Michigan the following Saturday would put them in a spot in the MAC tournament.
Agreed, and this goes for really any MAC basketball fan, not just Ball State fans. Know that there is probably going to be some shaking up in these next couple of weeks, just because it is so close of a race between like anywhere from 4, 5, all the way down through like 11, you said. It is really anybody's race right now, and that's comforting to some degree because Ball State knows that it's very much within reach, but it's also a little scary because to a certain degree, things are not totally in your control. All you can do is win basketball games, and if Ball State continues to do that against, let's be honest, a pretty easy schedule compared to what they've seen in the MAC so far, if they're able to do that, I think they set themselves up for not only making the MAC tournament, but possibly getting as high as the 7 or the 6 seed, which would be nice to avoid an Akron or a Toledo.
It would be, and I think the big picture here for the Cardinals is that bottom 5 seeds right there. You play Western, you play Eastern, and you play Northern Illinois in 3 of your last 6 games. They don't necessarily all have to go in the win column, but you know that not only are Eastern Michigan and NIU fighting for a spot, you know that game is going to go down to the wire because those 2 teams need it. It's not an easy game for Ball State because NIU and Eastern are below them. Eastern and NIU are fighting for the same spots.
Griffin, I'll be honest with you. I think all 3 of those games do have to be wins for Ball State. This team has been tested, and they have not been up to the task really all season long. They've dug themselves into a hole where you are on the outside looking into the tournament. It's go time. You have to win the games you're supposed to win. You cannot afford to slip up and give up like you did against Miami. They know they can beat Northern Illinois, Eastern Michigan, and Western Michigan because they've already beaten them this season. If you've beat them, I know it's tough to beat a team twice. Don't get me wrong, but this is a Ball State team that has got to have some confidence going into those games. And I think if you pick up 1 or 2, it just puts too many things out of your control. You want to make sure you have put a definitive stamp on this season, knowing that you've done everything you possibly can to put yourself in a position to make the tournament in Cleveland.
Yep, and then we move over to women's basketball quickly. Ball State in a much better position on that graph. Tied for first with Toledo, Kent State just behind, and then a big drop-off. And kind of similar story as the men's, where 4 through 11 are really interchangeable.
Yeah.
I would say.
The beauty of the MAC, man.
Even Central Michigan. This is a huge game for Central on Wednesday against the Cardinals because they're 1 game back of seeds 8, 9, and 10. And for Central, as you heard in the interview with Jussie, he firmly believes that they can win some of those last few games because they're playing teams right there with them. And it's going to be an interesting battle for them as well as for the Cardinals to see if they can stay up top, because this Toledo game, barring an upset on Wednesday from either team, this game Saturday is going to determine the 1 seed.
Yeah, and
in all likelihood.
Very much so. And we saw last year, this is a thing that worries me for Ball State. We saw last year how good of a spot they were in heading into that last week and a half of the regular season. This is a team that really wanted to compete for a MAC championship last year. And then they got into some close games against really solid opponents at the top of the conference in the last week and a half. I'm talking Bowling Green, who's not necessarily there this year, and Toledo, a very familiar opponent. They lost both of those games. They slipped in the standings heading into the Mid-American Conference tournament, and then they faced Toledo again in the MAC tournament and lost in the second round. Weren't even able to make it to those finals. So for Ball State, I think it's about building confidence into the tournament. We know this team has the star power, the ability to score, the defense. They're the whole package. This team can win the MAC tournament. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's about having the right mentality heading into Cleveland, and that starts with taking care of business against good opponents heading into the tournament. I think Toledo is going to be the first of those last few tests that could really bolster Ball State's confidence heading into the tourney.
Well, there's your look at the Mid-American Conference standings. We'll update you those next week after a couple of big matchups that we just talked about. We'll see where the Cardinals land. But for now, let's take you through the upcoming schedule. Tuesday night, men's basketball at Northern Illinois. Wednesday night, women's basketball hosts the Central Michigan Chippewas. That game can be streamed on SL Digital Radio with myself and Braden Carroll on the call. Always a good day when we're on digital.
Absolutely.
And then you move on to Saturday, where the Ball State women's basketball team travels to Toledo in a marquee matchup. Cannot wait for that one. And at the same time, men's basketball takes on Eastern Michigan here in Muncie. That game can be streamed on SL Digital Radio with Max Gilly and Dane Massey on the call. But that's all for this week's episode of The Cards Court. We'd like to thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget to tune in next week when we finish off our regular season, and we'll explain the sad details why then. But we'll get you our final regular season episode next week, so don't go anywhere. We'll see you next week. Sam Niger, Griffin Leonard, Jesse Goldberg-Strassler, thank you so much for tuning in to The Cards Court. The court is adjourned.
The Cards Court is hosted and produced by Griffin Leonard and co-hosted by Sam Niger. Be sure to follow BSU Sports Link across social media for the best stories in Ball State sports. The Cards Court has been a production of Ball State Sports Link.